Good. It helps, I think, to be wealthy and beautiful. Both of those things were true of Vanessa Bell and her sister. I've got the first photographs. Let's put the first one on, and you can see what they look like. Weren't they lovely? Vanessa is batting the cricket ball, and that's Virginia behind her. And the first photograph is Vanessa, and the second is Virginia. Vanessa was unbelievably beautiful. She was very tall. And one thing that Connie told me, because she sort of knew the family, because she lived in the area, she knew about her. She was an extremely kind woman. By all accounts, she did have that quality that when she went into a room, everybody knew that she was there. But she was self-effacing. She wasn't throwing herself about it all. She just made everybody feel very, very comfortable and very good. And I think this is very interesting. She was born in 1879 and she died in 1961. And Virginia was born in 1882, so she was 2 years younger, 3 years younger. And she committed suicide in 1941. Now, poor Virginia, from the time that she was born, was subject to these appalling fits of horror and misery, in which she completely lost all consciousness. She did not know where she was. She just felt terribly frightened, and everything was dark, and people were attacking her. And these would last sometimes hours and days. And this happened all through her life. And frankly, at the end of her life, this is why she committed suicide. She'd been, because of medicine and all sorts of her condition, she'd been relatively well for a long time. And then suddenly she felt it coming on again. And she felt she couldn't stand it. So she deliberately killed herself. And I think that's perfectly understandable with those situations. Their parents were wealthy. She comes from a very intellectually profound, they both do, profound family. The father was called Sir Leslie Stevens, a KCB, and he was the first editor of the Dictionary of National Biography. Huge amount of work. And he died in 1904. He was born in 1832. And her mother came from a very wealthy family. She died when the girls were quite young. She died when she was 49. And Vanessa was about 15 at the time. And this was very difficult because it meant that Vanessa had to take over when her mother died. First of all, she had both the family, both the mother and the father, had been married before. And this was a second marriage, both of them. And so they had children by the first marriage. And the father had these Duckworth boys, the 2 boys. And had a daughter called Stella. And Stella, when her mother died at the age 49, Stella took over the family house, the family of all the organization. They lived, needless to say, in Kensington, and they lived in a large house. They had loads of servants and so on. But she died a year after the mother. And suddenly, the very young, very, very young 15-year-old Vanessa, her father just assumed he was completely bereft by all this, and he just assumed that she would take over all the problems of the household. And quite frankly, when he died, we're talking about, this was about 1902, and so she had something like 18 months of this, and he died in 1904. And she did something these 2 girls did something quite incredible. There was a boy too. There was a boy called Adrian. I should have mentioned this. There was a son, a boy called Adrian. And the children decided they had enough money. They sold the house immediately and they moved to the new, slightly down market, Bloomsbury. All their relations were terribly shocked, but they did it to get away from their particular circle, because all their aunts and cousins and so on were telling them what to do. And they felt they could have a sort of an individual a point if they left. So they went back to Bloomsbury, where, of course, the boys, they were educated at home. They had no her mother and her sister, and a reading that was basically what educated them, because the boys, of course, went to boarding school and eventually to Cambridge. And it was because of the group in Cambridge. They were the nucleus of the Bloomsbury group. And these are the people that we're going to be talking about all the time. And so they moved to 46 Gordon Square. It was Virginia and two brothers. And so let's see the next pictures, and you'll see a slightly later photograph of the family on holiday. Now, they always went to somewhere called Studland. I didn't know where it existed, but my group did. It's a beach in Dorset, and they went there virtually every year. And what we're seeing at the same day, two photographs on the left of the same day, and they are Clive Bell, who was a friend of Adrian's. This is how they met. This is for Clive Bell, and this is Virginia, and it's Lytton Strachey. Clive Bell's in the middle. And in the photograph, it's the little boy Julian, and on the right, there's a painting, the first painting we have of Vanessa's, of her son, Julian. She painted, or she wanted to paint, from a very little girl. She was trained by sort of, amateur watercolorists and people. She did briefly before actually, I think it was the death of her mother. She went to the Royal Academy, but for a term, not for very long. But so she didn't have any serious sort of art school training. She more or less trained herself, you see, with amateurs and so on. But I think these photographs are wonderful because it gives you an idea of what people wore when they went to the beach. Look at those hats, and the little boy with his hat on here. It's wonderful. This is 1909, 1910. Now, why Clive Bell? Well, what happened was that Adrian, he was one of Adrian's friends, and he brought them to Bloomsbury, but Adrian died, and so shocked was Vanessa. She married Clive, and she said later on that she didn't really love him, but he was part of the family, and their marriage to begin with wasn't unpleasant. They were moderately happy together for a few years, but it never really gelled. And although they remained friends, it is said that he had mistresses from the beginning of their marriage until the end, and they never divorced, but they separated after about 10 or 15 years. Okay, let's have the next one. This is her beloved brother, Toby, and he's the one that died at the top there. Very, very beautiful. And he went, she and he and Virginia went to Greece for a holiday, and they came, he contracted typhoid. They both were ill, but he died. And this is, as I say, the photograph underneath, the one that we're looking at underneath, is in the garden, in the garden of the house in Pimlico. It's Toby Stevens at the top, but in the garden, on the extreme left, there's a woman sitting down. She's an important figure in this group. She's called Lady Ottoline Morell, and she was a great hostess. Again, probably because of they were called Stevens, by the way. Her name was Stevens. Because of the Stevens, Bloomsbury became moderately fashionable again. And Adrian and the boy and Toby and so on later on moved to another house but in the same square. And this Lady Ottoline Morell was a great society hostess, and all the sort of the elegant and the intellectuals would go to her parties. And this is a portrait of her on the floor. She's sitting down on the floor. And next to her is a young woman called Nice Hayes, and she eventually would be the wife of Forster. Sitting in the chair is Lytton Strachey, behind him is Duncan Grant, and sitting on the right is Virginia. And this particular photograph is 1915. Now, they were almost immediately going to move to, this is when they were going to move to Charleston. Now, on the right, it's an early drawing by Vanessa of Clive Bell, and underneath there are two photographs. And actually, I thought these were tremendously early. Now, the Charleston situation was because of this. Now, the Bloomsbury, the group, were terribly, terribly anti-war. They were internationalists, to be fair to them. I mean, they couldn't particularly dislike the Germans like everybody else was doing, and it was a sort of household where everybody, all nationalities came and went. And so when the war started, all the males of the family decided that they were conscientious objectors. Of course, Toby had died. And by this time, Duncan Grant, a young artist, again from a relatively wealthy background, but had been trained, was part of the group. And Vanessa, by this time, estranged from, the marriage was still there, but only in name. Virginia, before this, I'm sorry, I'm a bit back, but I forgot to tell you that Virginia, who had already had the beginnings of her problems, but she had met again one of the group of Toby's friends, a Jewish boy called Leonard Woolf from Cambridge, and he was an absolute saint, and they married. And because of her recurring nervosity, really, they decided to move to the country. So they moved to a place near Asham, in Sussex. And because of this, Virginia used to go and stay with them, with her children. And they found Charleston. And in 1916, it was a big house. It was a farmhouse, actually, with a lot of ground. And I don't think she ever actually owned it. She rented it from the farmer. And basically, she rented it for a home for herself, not only for herself, but for her two friends, because both Duncan Grant and eventually Lytton Stretch and so on, but particularly Clive Bell and so on, decided that they didn't want to go into the army, but they had to do something. The government insisted that they worked on the farm. So she was an amazing woman. She found this house, and she found a farmer nearby who would in fact employ them. And so they spent the war being sort of farm laborers. And this is why the beginning of Charleston. So we're looking actually at 1916. This is the time that this particular picture was taken in 1915, but we're now moving to 1916. Okay, let's have the next. Now we're now going to coming into the group is going to be my particular favorite, and that was Roger Fry. Now Roger Fry was older than the rest of them. He was born in 1866. He died in 1934. But he
Okay. Kind of go on, Kira.
Well, the point, Roger Fry, who turns out to be my great favorite, he was one of the most important people in Britain, and we kind of don't know about him. Why was he important? Well, he actually originally was an academic, a sort of intellectual philosopher. And then he became interested, he got interested in art. And he went to Paris and went to the various places to learn to be, and he became interested in art. Astonishing, he became therefore suddenly, this happened again.
No.
He suddenly became interested. He wrote a book about Bellini. His interest was the Renaissance, and really had little or no interest of what was going on around him. And then quite by accident, he went to Paris and found the post-impressionists. He found Gauguin, Van Gogh, and of course Cézanne. Cézanne he became absolutely besotted by. He was so excited by this that he determined that he would bring this to England, because nobody in England had the faintest idea of what had been going on. But these pictures he painted before, this picture on the left, he painted before this happened. Now the picture on the left is actually, it's an estuary in Suffolk, it's Blytheburg, and it's 1892. The picture on the right is not by him, it's by the mysterious Duncan Grant. Now, Duncan Grant was this young, very, very talented painter. I'm showing you this because these people are all either intermarried or cousins or aunts, because this portrait is of James Strachey. Now, the Strachers are going to be very, very closely involved with the Bloomsbury group. And this particular picture was painted when Duncan Grant was a very young man. This was painted in 1910. And if you look at it carefully, you will see sort of bits of Sargent. And you have to remember at the time that Sargent was possibly the most...
Yes.
She met Roger Fry in about 1996, 1907. When she went to the Royal Academy, she occasionally went for about a year. The new Slade School of Art had started, and Roger Fry at that time was briefly the professor of art of art history at the Slade. Mm-hmm. And he was very well thought of. He'd already written an important book about his interest in this case. This is before Gauguin, actually. He was known as a sort of a Renaissance scholar, really. And he was very, very successful, and they became great friends. And he himself was, as I say, was a pet. During his time at the Slade, this is when he met Vanessa. We're talking about 1909, 1910. And as you see, the picture we've been looking at, Duncan Grant's picture, is about this time. This is 1910, and his was earlier. This is earlier. Let's put the next, and I'll put a couple of, you'll see a couple of his paintings. Now, the picture on the left, which is absolutely charming, is one of Duncan Grant's paintings this is, of course, it's Venice. But of course, in this case, he's been looking at Whistler. I don't think there was much doubt of that. It has that kind of Whistlerian quality about it. And it's in 1899. Now, the center one is very interesting. These two are by Vanessa Bell. The picture on the right was her very, very first most successful painting that she exhibited at the Royal Academy. And it's called The Iceland Poppies, and it's 1905. And again, she was trained, when she was at the Royal Academy, Sargent actually did give her a few lessons, and she was looking at Sargent. And it's not surprising when you see her portrait in the center, it reminds us very much of Sargent. Now, this lady is called Lady Robert Cecil. And this was a painting of hers in 1905. So what we're looking at two pictures on the right. This is 1905, finished 1907. The one on the left is Roger Fry, 1899. Now, what happened in between? Of course, what happened in between was that Roger Fry discovered modern art. Okay, next one. And this is what happened. The top left-hand corner, which is so interesting. It's a photograph, contemporary photograph. It is the first of the most important thing that happened actually to English art. It was his exhibition of Manet and Post-impressionism. He was the man who invented the word Post-impressionism. And this is when the English world, it was absolutely attacked enormously by the press But it was so, people were so excited about this terrible sort of reputation that there was something like sort of 2,000 people went to see it. But there it was at the Grafton Gallery, and you see the date. It was 1910, 1911. Tremendous excitement and great carry on, to such an extent that he had the second one, which is the one on the right, which is the second post-impressionist. Now there had been a change in his associations. He had met Vanessa Bell, he'd met the Bells, and he'd met Duncan Grant and so on, all of that group, the Bloomsbury group. And Duncan Grant actually did the design for the second post-impression exhibition, and we're now 1912. Now, underneath this, there are a series of very interesting photographs of what they looked like at that particular time. And so we are seeing Roger Fry sketching on the left. He's about 20 years older than the rest of them. In the center, this is Vanessa Bell actually painting that Lady Robert Cecil, who's sitting in the corner there. And on the extreme right, the young Duncan Grant. Now, goodness knows what was special about Duncan Grant. I have no idea, but everybody fell in love with him. I mean, he was literally, he had some sort of strange charisma, which was quite extraordinary. It doesn't come through, I may say, either in the paintings or the photographs. Okay, next one. Now, this is early Vanessa Bell, after she's seen Gauguin, Van Gogh, and Cézanne. And the picture on the left is by one of the group of the friends. I don't know what happened to him. He was a writer. He was called Saxon Sidney Turner. And this is him at the piano. And this is her painting of him in 1908. Now, this, as you see, after that tremendous exhibition. But the one on the right is the big shock. This is post-Gauguin. This is her picture, The Bathers, of 1911. Now look at some interesting things. Look at the flattening of the surface. Look at the sort of denial of single-eye perspective. But particularly notice the black line that is around all of the figures. They almost look like cartoon figures, I would say. Now, who are they? Possibly the figure lying down with the hat on the front here, maybe Virginia, but on the whole, they're just a series of friends. And it's at that beach in Courtauld. Now, this is what she was painting like in 1911. So when Roger Fry started the second impression exhibition, she took part. And so next one, we will see what happened in the second Impressionist exhibition. Look what's happened to all of their painting. The one on the left is Roger Fry. Remember the line I told you about before? That particular still life, the jug and eggs, is 1911. And of course, Matisse. They all adored Matisse. The picture in the center is Vanessa Bell of her great friend, going to stay the rest of her life with her. She's called Molly McCarthy, and this is 1912. But the picture on the right is very interesting because this is Vanessa Bell showing us what the second Impressionist exhibition looked like. It's her picture of the second post-impressionist exhibition. It was exhibited. The exhibit was in 1912, 1913, and this is painted at the same time. The picture is now at the D'Orsay. Now, it's called the Matisse painting because you can see the Matisse red room and all of them. This is Vanessa Bell's example of what it looked like. It completely shocked the British world, changed everything. Okay, nobody ever painted again the same way. Now, this particular lady, this is a very early Duncan Grant. I've put it on because of this information. And it tells you again, you see, friend of the Virginia Woolf, member of in this case, the neo-pagan group of friends, and this is the sort of world that they're all doing. And she painted her several times. And this is a picture of his in 1912. Now let's look at the next one, because this is even more interesting. This is actually not a member of the Bloomsbury group. He was a separate painter, but I put him on because of this particular picture. Because what happened after Roger Fry's post-impressionism is that suddenly other dealers realized that perhaps there was some money in this funny foreign stuff. So this particular picture is a painting of the Stafford Gallery. And this is why I put this picture on. This is Spencer Gore. Spencer Gore actually is a self-portrait, 1912, 1914. And the Stafford Gallery began to show these contemporary after the Monet exhibition. And in 1911, it put on this big show of Gauguin, Cézanne, and Van Gogh. And Spencer Gore painted the exhibition. And I thought this was so interesting because their pictures, of course, we all know. You know, this one is now in the Courtauld. And this one, as you know, very famous early Gauguin. But isn't it interesting? This is the sort of thing that happened to the art world at that moment. Poor old Spencer Gore, he didn't live very long. He died actually as a very young man. And this is possibly the last picture he ever did. He was only 35. He isn't a member of the group. I only put him on because of this particular painting. Now, as far as we're concerned, let's put on the next one, because the next one is the first time we're going to see Charleston. And as I've already said, the reason for Charleston was the 1914 war. And the house on the left is called Asham House, and that's the house that is not Charleston, but it's next to it. It's the house that Virginia Woolf and Leonard Woolf owned, and this is where Vanessa Bell visited and found 4 miles away Charleston. So this particular picture is 1914, and the one on the right, the haystack. Sorry, it's 1912, and the one on the right is also 1912. Now, this is important because at the same time, she's obviously seen Monet's haystacks. Now, Monet was interested in light and color, but she's not. Look how solid her stuff is. Look at flat, exactly. And look at the edge. You see the careful edge.
Outline.
The outline that comes with everything. This is going to be completely stay with us. This makes her her work seems to be to us, when you see it more and more, very contemporary. But this particular one, I say, this is the next one. We'll see the next one that happens.
It almost looks like a filter that you put on photographs now
yes,
via computer programs.
It's extraordinary.
It's like that abstraction that happens as a result of like
this house, by the way. This particular house, but the Wolf stayed in. They bought it in 1912, and they stayed till 1919. And this is one where they, as I say, it was very close to Charleston. Next one was painted in Charleston. Now this is another group, because again, a group of friends, a painter that I knew nothing about at all, and still don't know very much about him. He's called Frederick Etchells, and they'd met at the Royal College, and he later became an architect. And actually, he was a sort of all the sort of the sort of places like sort of offices and so on. This is sort of architecture he was. But this particular picture was painted by Vanessa at Charleston, and it's he and his sister. I thought it was his wife, but it's his sister Jessie. And this particular picture was painted in 1912. Now again, I ask you to look at the composition of it. You see, there's virtually no effort to make it realistic in a very curious way. It's architecturally, its form is very interesting. Look at the outside window, just the plain colors, and the woman sitting down. The one on the right is too bright, by the way. I got it from a book. Most of these pictures are not going to be perfect, because some of them, the exhibition that we went to, there weren't an awful lot of
It
paintings
was
there.
literally two.
Very small, and Camilla did some, so some of them were that. I think this one, I think Etchells was one of them, but certainly the other one wasn't. And this particular one is 1914. So we're talking at 1913, 1914, and there's no doubt about it that by now her style has changed, and the family are living virtually. To begin with, it was a sort of summer place. They sort of moved out a country place. But because of the war and because of this problem with the two men, they actually she was living there virtually full time, and eventually she would make it her entire home. Okay, next one. Because these are so interesting. These are so beautiful. The one on the left, which I think is so marvelous, is her painting of Virginia Woolf. Look at the anxiety. Look what she's told us about this very, very disturbed woman. Incidentally, Virginia Woolf was very successful in her lifetime. Her first books were sold very quickly. Notice what she's wearing, because we're going to see another two pictures of Virginia Woolf, and they were all painted at the same time. We're talking about 1912. Now, the picture on the right is interesting because it's by Roger Fry, and it's of Virginia Woolf. And that is painted in 1917, 1912 and 1917. Look at the delicacy of that face. Now, she's going to do something which is quite amazing. She's going to tell us really, I think, about Virginia Woolf's mind. Look at the next two. Aren't they amazing? The face is almost entirely obliterated. Look at the shapes of the chairs. The one on the left is Virginia Woolf in a deck chair, and the one on the right is Virginia Woolf crocheting. And in both cases, we're talking about 1912. Now look at that beautiful movement of the chair here, and the way the whole thing is gloriously
It frames the
beautiful, beautiful painting. And this very, very interesting picture of painted people, the faces. It's about the mind of her sister. I think they're quite remarkable. But this is kind of a almost architectural line. Okay, next one. Because this is interesting again. This is Duncan Grant. We're seeing a bit of Duncan Grant because Duncan Grant by now was part of the group. He was having he was living with Maynard Keynes, and they were living in Bloomsbury, literally next door, or almost next door to Gordon Square, where of course still the Stevens family, not the Bell, the Stevens family, and she was back and forth. Now the picture on the left is Duncan Grant's picture of Maynard Keynes, and that's 1908. And the picture on the right is also Duncan Grant, but this time he's painting Lytton Strachey, and this is 1909. Now, these are the very earliest members of what later on became known as the Bloomsbury Group. Now, they were never a society or anything like this. They were just always a group of friends. And we're talking, Lytton Strachey was born in 1880 and he died in 1932. And they were a very important part of the group. Now the next one is going to be Roger Fry painting. Now this is at Studland Bay in Dorset in 1911, but you can see he's been looking at the Gauguin. It's astonishing, isn't it? The change in their work. And the picture on the right, I've put this one on because it's Duncan Grant's painting of self-portrait. And as I say, everybody thought that he was the most extraordinarily wonderful person in the world. not to mention the most beautiful. I thought I'd better do a self-portrait. I can't say it myself, but there you are. That's 1910, and this is 1911. And this is the influence of Gauguin, I think, is absolutely typical, very, very special in Roger Fry's case. Now, Roger Fry was married, and his wife had a mental condition, and eventually she had to go into a home. He had 2 children, and he brought them up himself, his sister, Claire Cox. They're a very intellectual family. She became the head of one of the Cambridge colleges. But he fell, rather unfortunately for him, he fell madly in love with Vanessa. And Vanessa she had an affair with him from about 1913 to 1911 to about 1913. It didn't last long, but he was besotted with her for the whole of his life, really. But these pictures actually are Duncan Grant's again. The one on the right is he's sort of looking at what Virginia Woolf is doing. I mean, Vanessa Bell is doing, because this is his picture of Lytton Strachey of 1909, and the one on the left is his painting of Maynard. Sorry, I'm getting this wrong. So I'm going mad. Sorry, forgive me. The one on the right, of course, is Vanessa Bell. I said it was him, but the one on the left actually is Roger Fry. This particular one is Lytton Strachey of 1915, and the Vanessa Bell is Lytton Strachey of 1913. And as I say, this very curious way she has of describing the kind of the mind of the people. I think this is very interesting. I think these two are a fascinating group. She said in many of her letters she was tremendously influenced by Duncan Grant, and quite frankly, I think her work is more interesting. But she at the time was very, very, they used to literally paint side by side, and quite often the same things. And this is a case, this is a particular case. But the facial features, I think, are very interesting. Okay, next one. Because the next one, I think, is one of the very, very best of Vanessa Bell's. And this is this lovely place where they used to stay in the summertime. And it's called Studland Beach. It's 1912. But look at the composition. An extraordinary sort of little tent in which they used to change their clothes. The children sitting on, and she changing her clothes here, and the 2 women presumably in conversation. But that marvelously simple composition. And the one on the right, I think, is very funny. I put this one on because you can see what a poseur Duncan Grant was. This is a self-portrait in a turban, 1910, and the other one is 1912. Now, wonderful Roger Fry had been concerned about, he bought quite a lot of paintings of his friends, but he realized that artists were always broke. So he had this idea of starting a kind of little firm in which all the employers would be artists. And this was called the Omega Workshop. Look, put on the next one and you'll see what we're talking about. This particular poster was designed by Duncan Grant, and it tells us all about the Omega Workshop, which is in 33 Fitzroy Square. And as you see, you're invited to an exhibition of decorative art. Examples of interior decoration, bedrooms, nurseries, textiles, hand-dyed, dress material, trays, Christmas presents. And in the center, there's a photograph of what when you went upstairs and into the room to buy the clothes. This is what you saw. And the picture on the extreme right is of an interior by the Omega Workshop. But this particular one was by a friend of Holland Park, and that's 1914, and the opening one is 1913. So this is what the Omega Workshop. Now, this is an extraordinarily generous thing to do, because all the artists that worked there they didn't have to work. They only worked 3 days a week because he decided that they had the rest of the time to do their own work. And he paid them at the time, out of his own money, he paid them 30 shillings a week, which was a lot of money in 1913, and it meant that they could live on it. But the one-up thing was that anything they did, and they designed fabrics and carpets and goodness knows what, it was not signed. You see this little sign, the Omega sign, this is the only thing that was on the bottom of all things. They were not individually signed. The idea was that everybody was in this great sort of sense of community. This particular, because I recognize it, these particular cushions were I recognize as Vanessa Bell's, and that carpet is Vanessa Bell's, because I'm from later on I know, but you wouldn't have known this. Now, sadly, of course, it wasn't a success. The stuff was much too expensive, and it was only bought by very, very few rather sort of open-minded people. And you have to realize that this was an enormous change from the heavy work of the Victorian period, because we're talking about 1913. And, you know, for one thing, they painted their walls white or light grey. Okay, next one, it was quite different, because here is where it was. There it is. There's Fitzroy, the original place. And in the center, I think this is absolutely lovely. It's these two girls wearing the clothes of the that you could buy. And one of them is an important figure. She's called Nina Hammett. And the painting on the right is by Roger Fry of Nina Hammett wearing an Omega workshop dress. And on the cushions on the side, the dress was designed, the material was designed by Vanessa Bell, and the curtains, the cushions on the side, you noticed them, they were the ones we were looking at before in the centre here. But this is where it was. You went in, and upstairs, I believe it was a foot clinic now or something, but that's where it was. It didn't last, of course. It went on until 1919, and finally was completely shut down in 1920, and he lost thousands. Okay, next one. But it was a good, a brilliant idea. And here's an example of what you could have bought if you went to see it. I think it's terribly interesting. You can see the things that we saw from the other one. Here's the carpets, the designs, for example. They really are very beautiful. And this particular lot, it was between 1913 and 1919. And the next one, we're going to see a chair, which was designed by Roger Fry. And the the tapestry was actually made by Vanessa Bell. But this particular furniture, you can see the only place you can see this now is in the Courtauld, and they haven't got a lot, but they've got some. This is where Camilla took these photographs from, and this is where you saw exactly what they are. Actually, the chair looks very nice. I thought it was very nice. The next one we're going to see are her designs, and here it is here. You see it says on here, it's all on here. And it was an enterprise, a tremendous enterprise. And the interesting thing was the anonymity, I'm going to say this word wrongly, but the fact that nobody knew which artist actually designed what.
The anonymity of the artist.
That's it, yes. And these are both, now we know, this is Roger Fry in the center, possibly with Vanessa, and the other one is Vanessa Bell. Because we're going to see something which is very next one, which is quite remarkable. This is a design for a screen by Vanessa Bell. And of course, she's been looking at Matisse's dancers. Remember the Matisse dancers? But this is so bright, so tremendously contemporary and beautiful. It's a screen. It was designed for a folding screen. And it was designed in 1913. As I say, the most important thing is the influence that she's been looking at. Okay, next one, you'll see some more, because here's a tile. It's a tile design later, right at the end. This is a 1919 design for the tile. And that's and the one on the right, it was a rug design. And that was 1913, 1914. And again, this is from the real thing. These are both the photographs from Camilla. So we actually seen what the colours and so on look like, because it was there was a tiny little exhibition. It wasn't. I don't think it was. It did a.
It was literally like a room and a half.
It was a shame, wasn't it? Okay, next one, because this is so good. This is so beautiful. This is her lovely folding screen of figures and landscape, and it's 1913. Very complicated. It appears it was made of, they painted with distemper, this is what it says, and it was on paper. Then this was then put on the canvas, glued, and then on wood. It was very complicated. But the one I think is so interesting, that could literally have been painted now. And it's a girl by a tent, and it's on board. Look at it, isn't it interesting? These are both 1913. I think she's important, don't you think? She was one of the very first in terms of the simplification of form.
If at all, for the diverse mediums in which she worked in as well.
Amazing. Okay, next one. This is the house in which they lived, and there's two plaques. One is for her and Clive Bell, and the other one is for Maynard Keynes. But the painting on the right is one of her pictures of her life with her. They were friends. I mean, they weren't by now, they weren't living in that sense. They weren't living together all the time, but the children, he saw his children all the time. And this is her picture of Clive Bell and Duncan Grant drinking wine. The date is unknown, but it actually was in one of these rooms in Gordon Square. And I think the wallpaper is interesting. Again, it's got the kind of the Omega stuff, the carpet, the wallpaper, and so on. This is the kind of interior that they were trying to, of course, the paintings on the wall. But this is Vanessa Bell. Okay, next one. This is Vanessa Bell's portrait of Roger Fry. As I say, she had an affair with him for about 4 or 5 years, but she was never wildly in love with him. And but he was with her until he died. And he supported everything she did. And that's her self-portrait of 1915. And the Roger Fry is 1912. And of course, they've been looking at Impressionism, haven't they? Look at the brushstrokes. Interest, and we're going to see examples of her work a little bit. Next one. This is one of her by now she's doing woodcuts, and this is her nude. And Roger Fry had moved into book production and everything, and this is one of the books that he produced of one of her work. And the picture on the right is Lytton Strachey again by her. And this is 1912. And the nude is a little later. This is something like 1918. Okay, next one. These are fantastic. These are all the covers that she did for her sister. And they are various, as you see, the dates are various. Virginia had by now a tremendous reputation. She was selling very, very well. Jacob's Room was very successful. And you see this is 31, 22, 25, 27, 29. And the years are 37, one of the last ones. And this one between the acts, just before she killed herself. Because all of these are wood blocks by Vanessa Bell. Okay, next one. These paintings are just extraordinary. I mean, I've never, ever seen these before. This is just called the model. But look at the solid construction of it. Look at the weight of that figure. And the one on the right is she's responding to the contemporary vorticism which is going on in the air, because this one is 1913. They're both 1913. And this street corner conversation is very much like that. The point about it is she was at this point, probably because the work she was doing at the Omega workshop, she began to look at abstract art, and she began to use it. I've got the next one. And this is possibly her most famous one, which is always on show. And this is the conversation. And it's quite witty when you think about it. There's something in my throat. Look at the detail. It's extraordinary. It's marvelous gossiping conversation. And look at the frame. Isn't it lovely?
Drink some more.
I haven't got the water in here. I've got tea as well. And this tea will do. And the model is in 1913. Sorry, the conversation is 1913-14. And here again is interesting. Tells us a little bit about them. This is around 1919. Compositions are so fascinating. The chair probably is designed by Roger Fry. These are one of the chairs. Now, the actual furniture that was sold in the Omega workshop was not made in England necessarily. I mean, all the fabrics were actually produced in France, and a lot of the furniture as well. I mean, that was firms who made the stuff. They weren't made specifically by the artists that did them. But it was a marvelous idea. I mean, it was in a sense it wasn't that original. It was really actually for the time. It was really another one. If you remember that it was William Morris who'd started this first idea of the arts and crafts idea, but it was actually a development really of that idea. Okay, next one. Because these pictures are extraordinary. This is this wonderful self-portrait of Duncan Grant. It was on the grass. This is why you've got that funny blue mark there. But it's much later. It's 1928. He died in 1934. But the picture on the left is that Nina Hamnet lady of 1917. Now, not only were we talking about most of these chaps, not in the case of Duncan Grant, of Roger Fry, but most of them were both homosexual and bisexual, and certainly Nina Hamnet and her group were lesbians, because we're talking about the Vita Zapfel West group of people. So you've got this mixture of all sorts of sexual stuff between them all. It's a nice painting, I think, of Nina. Okay, next one. I think it's an interesting painter. Here's one of his still life. This passion for passive is interesting. This is with the coffee pot. This is 1921, and look at the detail of the composition. And we think that it's rather rude looking, but I think it's a banana. I think so. Okay, next one. These are his pictures of his beloved Vanessa. This very, very early one, relatively early, it's 1916, and he's using sort of impressionist technique to try to describe her personality. And the one of her lying in a deck chair, I think, is lovely. This is 1911, and this is 1916. And this one, this watercolor and gouache is 1911/15. And he absolutely adores her. But by this time, she'd moved. She had a very unfortunate passion for Duncan Grant that lasted all her life. Because, as I say, the one thing he was certainly not he certainly sort of, as I say, seemed to go to bed with everybody. Okay, next one. Because here is Charleston. This is where they went. And this is what they did with the interior. I've only put a few of them on, but they are so lovely. This is, I mean, the house itself is, it's an old farmhouse, probably 17th century, actually. And this is the east front. And what we're looking at is what is called Clive Bell's study. And it's 1932, roughly. And all of them were there. Look at their paintings all over the walls. Look at the material of the covers of the chairs were designed by Vanessa Bell. The table actually is Spanish, sort of 17th century. And I think it's an old, but most of the stuff, you begin to see a bit of the fireplaces which they decorated. And everything about this place is decorated. It's very strange. Okay, next one. But this, I think, is fascinating. This is Mrs. John Hutchinson, and she's Clive Bell's mistress. And we don't like her, do we, very much? This is Vanessa Bell's painting of her. I think this is very funny. And at the same time, she's experimenting with abstract art. Now, this is very early. This composition, this is 1915. She was experimenting with abstraction in 1914. This is 1914, and this particular picture of Mrs. John Hutchinson is a year later. And the colours, as you see, are the same, and the composition is interesting. Okay, next two, they're very interesting. This is Duncan Grant's The Tub, and this is actually something there was so much to show. The things I didn't show were quite wrong, because I should have been showing you African sculpture, because I must remind you at the same time, they knew, of course, Picasso's work, they knew Matisse's work, they adored Matisse, and particularly the interest in African sculpture. And the picture on the left, which of course is Duncan Grant, The Tub, 1913, of course, is looking at African sculpture. Less so on Vanessa's. Vanessa's Tub is later, it's 1917, and she's still committed to the European sculpture of female, I mean, the female form. But again, this flattening, I think, is interesting. Everything is flat. So you're looking out of a window, you're looking at the sea, but it's all completely flat. Okay, next two. These are actually Duncan Grant's essay into abstraction. Actually, the one on the left is 1914-15, and it's an interior of Gordon Square. So actually, it starts off as a sort of a dining room or a room in a house, and the one on the right is Cyclamen. He never really goes as abstract as she does. And as I say, they're working virtually side by side now. He lives almost full time now at Duncan. I mean, he came I think for 2 weeks and then sort of never left. Okay, next one, because these are so interesting, because they're so early. She more than he went into abstraction briefly, for structural reasons. This bedroom in the Gordon Square is 1912, but the composition is these two abstractions, and they're both 1914. And she plays with space, I think, very interestingly in these. But they certainly were very helpful to her painting. Okay, she went back to figurative painting. Now, interestingly, these are not her. These are Duncan Grant. This is her work. This is Duncan's picture of Charleston's kitchen, and of course you see this is possibly Julian or Quentin, and this is of course Vanessa, and this is the kitchen, and the picture on the right is they're both by him, and this is the farm buildings. This is 1918, and this is 1920, and now really they are virtually living there almost full time. Okay, next one. Just a couple of them to give you an idea of what the place is like. Every inch of it is decorated. And by everybody, amazingly. Because you see the one on the left, the hearth is actually painted and designed by Roger Fry. But everything else, the two funny characters, that's Duncan Grant. And I think the funny little animal in the front is her son, Quentin Bell's. And some of these pots are Quentin Bell's. And the paintings, there's actually in the corner, you can hardly see it, but it's that one that we saw right at the beginning, the very, very early Hoppy one of her. And look at the pans, everything is decorated. This one is the weirdest one. And this is the room, this was originally his studio. But as Connie reminded, he actually died there. I mean, he spent the rest of his life there. But it eventually became his sitting room. But at the time, this was his studio. And look at these characters, they're so funny. It's extraordinary. There's that portrait of her on the wall. It's actually cluttered with things. They're quite remarkable. The mantelpiece and photographs and everything. And as I said, Quentin's work became a potter, her son. Okay, next one. This one I think is very interesting because it shows you his copies. They used to go to the National Gallery and copy things to teach themselves. And this particular one is a Cosimo at the top there. It's his copy of it. And it's the hallway into his room. It's a nice photograph. It shows you all the portraits. There's a self-portrait. They're both self-portraits here. And the furniture it is. And on the right, again, it's Clive Bell's bedroom, this one. And the fabrics are by the painted furniture is Duncan Grant, but the fabrics are Vanessa Bell's. And the painting on the wall, and the thing is Vanessa Bell. Everything is done. Okay, next one. This is the Garnet, who's going to be such a nuisance, really. This is David Garnet, Bunnick Garnet, he was called. And this is him in 1915. And at the time, he was Duncan Grant's love. And the pair of them moved in virtually. It must have been very difficult for her, because she had this absolutely unrequited passion. She finally persuaded him to go to bed with her because she wanted a child by him. And so Angelica was born. But it was the one time, it was a one-off thing. And this particular one in the middle is, I think, a lovely painting. This is by her, and it's called The Madonna Lily. These are both 1915, and the other one, The Blue Room, is 1916. But she's working all the time. She's got Julian, Quentin, and now she's going to have Angelica. But Angelica is always going to think that she was Clive Bell's daughter. Clive Bell was very decent about this. He always took her on, so that she did not know until she was 17 that her father was Duncan Grant. Okay, next one. This is her very, very first painting she did when she got to Charleston, and this is 1916. and it's the pond out of the window. And I think they're so beautiful, these. And the one on the right is later. That's the pond again from the window, but it's 1919. One on the left, 18, the one on the right, 19. And you see even the curtains are designed by her, made by her. Okay, next. This is her family. This is Clive Bell with Julian, Quentin, and Angelica. This is 1924. And the picture on the right is Duncan Grant's portrait of her in 1918. This is just about the time that Angelica was born, this particular picture. Okay, next one. Lovely photograph of she and Angelica. The clothes she wore were entirely sort of simple. She paid no attention to fashion as such, just wore what the sort of Amiga workshop things. And this is 1923, this picture, this photograph. And this interior, which is Charleston with a table, and this is 1921. They travelled all over the world. I mean, they didn't just stay there sort of. Remember, we're talking about people who had private income. You have to remember this. There was no real effort. There was no real, although they showed as much as they could and they sold. I mean, when I was an art student, we're talking, I'm so incredibly old that I can say this, but I'm talking sort of the 1950s. Duncan Grant was still considered one of the greatest English painters. I mean, when I was a student, this was so. But this particular one, they travelled a lot. They travelled to Italy, to Turkey particularly, and to France. And the next ones are going to be their pictures of France. On the left, it's Duncan Grant, south of France. And on the right, it's Vanessa Bell's The Seine. This is 22 and this is 21. They spent a lot of time abroad. I mean, their life, remember the children, the picture, the very first picture we saw of Julian and his nanny. The children were always looked after by nannies and governesses and so on. Okay, next to. This is Quentin. This is the youngest one. This is 1920. This is Quentin. And this is again back in London on the right. And it's Fitzroy Street. And it gives you an idea of how they collected all the stuff all over the place. The painting that's tipped up on the side is by, of course, Duncan Grant. The pot is by Quentin. The fabrics, of course, by either Fry or she. The whole place was always full of their own making, stuff of their own making. Okay, next one. This, I think, is a very touching one. This is the picture of Angelica on the left, a grown lady. This is it's just called an interior with the artist's daughter. It's 1935, 1936. And you see the same cover that we saw on the cover there, and the things, and the books, and the carpets, the flowers, and the one again, one abroad. In this time, it's in France. It's the vineyard, and that's 1930. So we're talking 1930. Look at the freedom of the brushstroke is interesting. And then we see 1935, which again, mostly she was painting her own stuff, her people and the people that was involved. She was completely ignored. Okay, they were stuck up in the attic. Now, these are much, much later. This is Vanessa, the dining room. And this is Duncan Grant. And this is her daughter, Angelica. Angelica very foolishly married Bunny Garnett. And she had 4 girls. And these 4 girls were called Henrietta, Nerissa, Amaryllis and Frances. When she died in the south of France in 92, very sadly, two of her daughters had died before her. Quite why and what, I don't know. But look at the change in her. This is look at the. It's very interesting to see the change of style. Okay, next one. These are marvelous. This is the portrait of Leonard Sidney Wolfe in 1938. It's a study. Eventually, she made it into a painting, which I did give a slide of. This is a study, actually, is oil painting on thing, but the picture on the right, I think, is very interesting. This is Duncan Grant's portrait of her. Vanessa Bell, 1942. Look how regal she is. It could be in the previous century, the painting of almost a queen. I think it's a fascinating painting. I think it tells us a lot about what he thought about it. He lived there for the rest of their lives together, but of course his sexual life was very strange. Okay, next one. This is the last painting she made of her house. This is Charleston, and this is her last self-portrait, which I think is quite remarkable. Looking at herself. She died in 61, and this was painted in 1958. And the painting of the house was between 1950 and 1955. And you have to realize that he of course, outlived her. He died in something like 72, 73. It was a very sort of, he had a lover who looked after him right to the end of his life. Okay, I think that's it.